In the kingdom of Lithuania, at a military camp near Perdium County, a young man awoke in a state of utter shock. He was stunned by what had happened to him, holding his neck and gasping for breath. He couldn't believe he was still alive. He vividly remembered having just been defeated and killed in an unjust war. In that war, he recalled losing a duel and being grievously wounded by Aiden, one of the continent's 7 finest noble knights. Aiden had smiled cynically, remarking that this was the end for Gislin Perdium, the mercenary king and one of the 7 strongest men on the continent. Aiden declared the war over and asked Gislin if he had any last words as he pointed his sword at the kneeling man. Gislin, breathing heavily, replied that he had none, only regretting his failure to get revenge and cursing Aiden. Aiden was surprised to see Gislin still acting arrogant despite being near death. He then revealed that he knew Gislin was the eldest son of the fallen noble house of Perdium, who had left his family after his sister's death. Gislin, annoyed and curious, demanded to know how someone from another kingdom could know that. Aiden explained that he had worked for a long time to track Gislin down, and, most importantly, that it was they who had collaborated with the Delphine house to destroy Gislin's family. Gislin was shocked to hear the word "we," never imagining someone else besides the Duke of Delphine was behind his family's destruction. Before he could recover from the shock, Aiden pressed his sword to Gislin's neck, stating that there was no point in explaining further since he was about to die and should accept his fate. Gislin exploded in rage at the realization that the enemy before him was responsible for his family's ruin, screaming that he would never forgive him. Those were his last words, as Aiden then mercilessly swung his sword, beheading Gislin and sealing his dark fate. Now, Gislin looked at his reflection in a basin of water, fully aware that his neck should have been severed. What surprised him, besides being alive, was that his face looked younger. He wondered if it was all a hallucination or if he had been captured and was being used as a test subject by a mage. As he contemplated killing whoever was experimenting on him, a man entered his tent, calling for the young master to come out, knowing he was awake. Gislin recognized the man as Ricardo, a Perdium soldier. To confirm his suspicions, Gislin deliberately put Ricardo in a chokehold with his sword from behind. Instead of being scared, Ricardo pushed him away and irritably explained that Gislin had fallen asleep after throwing a tantrum for not being accepted as a commander for a raid on orc monsters. Ricardo, tired of explaining to the disbelieving Gislin, urged him to pack up as others were waiting outside the tent. Gislin, puzzled, asked where they were going. Ricardo replied that they were going home to Perdium County. Startled, Gislin grabbed Ricardo's shoulders and demanded he repeat himself, asking if he meant the Perdium County that had been destroyed. Shortly after, Gislin stood on a cliff outside the camp, overlooking Perdium Castle. He couldn't believe the castle was still intact when he clearly remembered it being razed to the ground. Hearing Ricardo warn him to be careful and never mention Perdium's fall in front of the Count, he pinched his cheek hard, but the pain was too real for a dream. Putting together all the strange occurrences from his younger face to the intact Perdium territory, Gislin suspected he had returned to the past. In his past, he had hated his own family. He was immature and caused trouble due to his inferiority complex. Over time, most people in the Perdium noble house distanced themselves from him. Unable to bear the criticism, Gislin ran away from home and became a mercenary a few years later. He survived countless battles, honing his skills until he became famous. But by the time he returned to Perdium to atone for his past mistakes, it had already been reduced to dust. At that time, Gislin regretted losing everything. But now, seeing with his own eyes that everything and everyone he loved still existed along with Perdium, his face filled with emotion. Overcome with joy and disbelief, Gislin chuckled to himself, which bewildered Ricardo. However, Gislin knew it was too early to celebrate. This second chance came with the burden of changing a destiny he must alter with his sword and determination. Recalling Ricardo's mention of the orc raid, Gislin thought to himself that he remembered this day as when most of the raid party would die. In his past life, he had joined the orc raid to gain rank and prestige. The report had stated there were only 3 orcs, which he thought would be easy for someone like him, who had no experience leading troops. But upon arrival, there were over 20 orcs. Almost everyone died because of his foolish desire to lead the squad. He believed defeating them should be possible now, as orcs lacked battle strategy, but he questioned if anyone would believe him, given his reputation as a useless bum. Suddenly, a wooden watchtower flew over Gislin, shocking him. The soldiers screamed hysterically that the orc monsters were attacking their camp. Gislin was even more shocked to see the orcs storming their defenses, as this had not happened in the past. Seeing many soldiers being thrown by the monsters, the raid squad commander, Skovin, shouted for them to form a defensive formation and not to panic. Skovin, running from a camp, was stopped as he had to block a charge from a large orc monster. He panicked, breaking into a cold sweat, frustrated by the surprise attack when his troops were not ready. He thought to himself about how there were more orcs than reported and that they would all die if this continued. Suddenly, Skovin was startled by someone shouting for him to look behind him. Indeed, an orc had raised its axe high to strike the commander without mercy. But before the monster could swing, Gislin dashed in like lightning, pushing the commander back, which greatly surprised him. To Skovin's shock, his young master faced the monster and, without hesitation, delivered a powerful upper slash that horrifically severed the monster's leg and right arm. Everyone there, from the commander to the entire troop who witnessed it, stared with wide eyes and open mouths at their young master being able to injure a large orc so severely. As the orc fell to the ground from a single swing, Gislin was still disappointed that he couldn't use mana yet. But that one slash instantly changed the troop's perception of him. He was no longer the same young man. Afterward, he approached Skovin and demanded that he be given command of the raid. The commander, Skovin, still sitting on the ground, frowned, wrestling with a mix of fear and admiration. He thought it was foolish for Gislin to ask for command while all their soldiers were risking their lives. Skovin got up heavily, looked away, and stated he couldn't do it, trying to hide his surging anxiety. Gislin was surprised by the refusal. Skovin stepped away and asserted that war was not a game. And even though Gislin was the young master, he couldn't just hand over the command given to him by the count. Hearing this, Gislin fell silent, feeling anger and frustration, but admitted to himself that he would have reacted the same way if some fool suddenly demanded control of the troops. Suddenly, a deafening roar cut through the air as a giant orc with a blood-red face and sharp tusks charged at them with burning rage. Though startled, Skovin shouted for them to fall back, saying he would handle it and that Gislin was too young to lead. However, Gislin, with a fiery gaze and unwavering determination, raised his sword, stating that it seemed he had no other choice. In an instant, he threw his sword, which surprised Skovin as it nearly hit his head. Skovin grabbed Gislin's collar, furiously and confusedly asking what he was doing. Gislin remained silent, letting Skovin see for himself what was happening. The sword flew towards the giant orc, piercing the weak spot on its forehead. It let out a hysterical roar before collapsing with a thud, splattering blood everywhere. Skovin was stunned, wondering how he had managed to hit the weak spot so precisely. Before Skovin could recover from his shock, Gislin looked at him coldly and asked if his name was Skovin and if he knew the most important thing on the battlefield. The question left the commander speechless, his expression turning to bewilderment. In the distance, the soldiers were trembling with fear as the orcs continued their relentless attack. Gislin told Skovin they couldn't hope to win while their troops were frozen in fear. What they needed was momentum. Instantly, with agile and powerful movements, Gislin leaped and struck the orcs blocking his path. In one high jump, he stabbed the head of an orc terrorizing the Perdium troops with deadly precision. Both the Perdium soldiers and Skovin were shocked by Gislin's reckless actions, but his frenzy didn't stop there. He roared for the orcs to come at him, vowing to finish them all. Without hesitation, Gislin charged forward, relentlessly slashing at every orc in his path. The sound of clashing swords and the hysterical screams of orcs filled the battlefield as Ghislain moved like a shadow, merciless and unending. Commander Skoven, who was initially doubtful, was now stunned and began to realize that there was something different about Ghislain. He wondered if he was dreaming, as even a mana user like himself struggled against them. So how could this skinny young master do it? Skoven knew Ghislain's body was exhausted, but he was amazed to see his movements remain agile, using the momentum of his sword swings to strike the orc's weak points. He fought like a sword master without mana, or perhaps even someone more skilled. With a burning spirit, Ghislain taunted the orcs, asking if this was all they had, as he wasn't even warmed up and they were unworthy of being called a warrior species. He then quickly ran away from the orcs, as the monsters blindly chased him. The Perdium troops grew confused and anxious. One of them shouted to the commander that the orcs were all rushing towards the young master. Hearing this, Skoven panicked, wondering what Ghislain was thinking as he watched the situation intently. Skoven knew that Ghislain entering the enemy lines and successfully diverting their attention was good, but he was confused as to why he was now running away. Skoven's mind drifted to a view in the distance, the edge of a high cliff, a dangerous place for a battle. He whispered to himself, realizing there was a cliff in that direction. He muttered the word cliff with bated breath, his face turning pale as a realization dawned on him. Without waiting any longer, Skoven immediately shouted for his troops to form a shield wall and follow the first sun. Meanwhile, the enraged red orcs relentlessly chased Ghislain, who continued to flee towards the cliff's edge. Once there, Ghislain parried all their attacks and thought to himself that if Skoven was a competent commander, he would already know his plan. Although he wanted to finish them all himself, his current stamina couldn't keep up. The rumbling footsteps of the Perdium army approached the cliff, startling the orcs. Seeing Skoven and his troops charging in formation with shields and spears, Ghislain smiled, uttered the word perfect, and suddenly leaped off the cliff. With a single word from Ghislain, now, Skoven unhesitatingly bellowed for his troops to push the orcs off the cliff. With a unified charge, Skoven's troops mercilessly shoved the cornered orcs off the edge, sending them to their deaths at the bottom of the deep chasm. After defeating the orcs, the soldiers, breathing heavily, exchanged victorious cheers for their success. However, Skoven, knowing Ghislain had also jumped, immediately screamed the young master's name at the cliff's edge. Ghislain had managed to survive the fall by hanging from his sword, which he had embedded into the cliff wall. Seeing this, Skoven smiled in relief and extended his hand to help Ghislain back up. But suddenly, Ghislain's grip on his sword loosened. He had run out of stamina to support his own body weight. As a result, he fell into the deep abyss, causing Skoven and his troops to scream in unison for the young master. At the edge of this ravine, life and death mingled, marking the beginning of a tougher struggle. Ghislain's vision went dark, and he awoke in his subconscious, hearing and seeing fragmented memories of his younger sister, Elena. The memories alternated between sadness and happiness, from Elena grieving their mother's death to her joy with Ghislain and their arguments. But the memory that left the deepest trauma for Ghislain was Elena, with teary eyes, pulling him to go somewhere with her. That trauma was also what woke him up in his room with a compress on his forehead. Ghislain couldn't believe he was still alive after falling into the chasm, and was grateful that Skoven's troops had saved him. But his mind was now in turmoil, wondering if the memory of Elena was just a dream. While feeling pain all over his body from overexerting himself in the orc fight, the door opened and a young woman entered quickly, asking if the master was awake. The woman was Belinda, Ghislain's loyal personal maid. Ghislain looked at her with confused eyes and softly said her name. Belinda smiled gently, but then spoke with a serious tone, asking if he knew how worried she was and reminding him she had told him to let the soldiers fight the orcs. Suddenly, without warning, Ghislain hugged Belinda tightly, surprising her. He simply said he was just happy to see her again. Belinda had been his loyal personal maid since childhood, regardless of his foolish behavior. However, after the Perdium family was destroyed and Ghislain disappeared, he never saw her again until his death at Iden's hands. Ghislain honestly never thought they would meet again in such a peaceful setting. Belinda smiled and asked why he was so happy when they saw each other every day. False tranquility. The shadow of disaster began to loom over Perdium. Instead of answering, Ghislain decided he had to tell Belinda the truth. Holding her shoulders tightly, he told her to listen carefully, as a disaster was about to shake Perdium. Belinda, bewildered, asked what he meant. Ghislain answered firmly that he had actually died and come back to life. Belinda paused, then replied lightly that she was sure the orcs had nearly finished him off. Ghislain tried to correct her, but Belinda believed that he, not Perdium, was the one in danger. She even lectured him not to play at being a commander, which frustrated Ghislain as his attempts to convince her failed completely. Seeing Ghislain still acting childishly, Belinda added what he would have done if he couldn't attend the festival. Ghislain was taken aback by the mention of a festival. Belinda smiled, asking if he had forgotten that Lady Elena had been waiting for the festival day to go with him, adding that it would be a good chance for them to mend their relationship, showing him a photo of the two of them. Holding the photo with his sister, Ghislain remembered there was a festival every year around this time. In his previous life, he had missed the festival due to a traumatic experience. When Ghislain asked when the festival was, Belinda said it would start in a week. Ghislain's mood instantly grew tense. He knew that 1 week from now would be a day that drastically changed his life. A soft voice came from the slowly opening door, asking if her brother was inside. Ghislain looked towards the door, once again recalling the memory that haunted him. He remembered how in the past, Elena had earnestly asked him to go with her, which turned out to be to the festival. Now, Ghislain looked at his sister with a bitter expression, thinking to himself that Elena would die at that festival next week. Without warning, Ghislain hugged his sister tightly, causing both Elena and Belinda to blush in confusion. Elena shyly asked him what was wrong and what kind of joke this was. Ghislain gently replied that he missed her, but Elena, feeling disgusted, quickly pushed her brother towards Belinda. This shocked Ghislain, as he couldn't believe his little sister had the strength to push him. Elena was not happy with her brother acting so clingy, especially since he had recently called her disgusting names. Ghislain then remembered that he had indeed been a terrible brother and was not close to his sister in the past. Feeling guilty, he immediately apologized, which spontaneously shocked both Belinda and Elena, who had never seen him apologize before. Elena even thought her brother had completely changed because he had been hit on the head by an orc. Ghislain defended himself, saying he had defeated the orcs, not been beaten by them. But when a sudden wave of pain hit him, Ghislain crumpled to the floor, shaking, which made Belinda and Elena laugh in bewilderment. Their laughter, however, meant the world to Ghislain. He thought to himself that everything was just as he remembered and wondered why his past self had wasted so much time on unimportant things. At the festival next week, he had refused Elena's invitation to go together, using the orc attack as an excuse for being sad. That was the last day he saw her. Elena's body was later found torn to pieces, along with her guards. With regret and anger, he thought he should have gone with her. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and 2 guards named Jamal and Philip entered. They were looking for Elena and informed her that the servants needed her help to check their work on the festival equipment. Ghislain was surprised that the servants were asking Elena for help. Belinda, slightly annoyed, replied that the young master wouldn't know anything since he was always lazy. The truth was, Perdium was so short on manpower that even the young lady had to pitch in. Ghislain realized that in the past, he never cared about such things, so it was natural he didn't know. Not wanting his sister to work alone, Ghislain told her as she was leaving that he would help too. This statement moved Elena so much her face flushed. Consequently, Belinda and Elena were again shocked by his sudden change, becoming convinced his head must have been hit by the orcs. Soon, they arrived at the festival area, but most people were scared to see Ghislain there to help. Annoyed, Elena pushed her brother away, telling him that if he wanted to help, he shouldn't get close to the workers. Despite being pushed away, Ghislain remembered that Elena's body had been found near a slum area, far from the festival grounds. He was certain someone had either called her there or forced her to go. To prevent that from happening again, Ghislain knew he had to investigate the castle's interior and exterior to rule out all worst-case scenarios. As Elena was shooing Ghislain away, someone ran up from behind, calling his name. It was Old Man Fergus, Ghislain's personal guard, who was worried after hearing about the orc incident. Elena was glad Fergus arrived just in time and asked the old man to take her strange brother back to his room. Annoyed at losing a crucial opportunity to investigate, Ghislain knew he had to find another way to learn about the castle's condition within the week. Instead of going back to his room, Ghislain asked Fergus to take him to the training ground, which he believed had been neglected. Fergus, bewildered, asked why he wanted to go to the training grounds. With great determination, Ghislain replied that he wanted to train. Now it was Fergus's turn to be shocked by his young master's change in attitude. Moments later, they arrived at the training ground, and Ghislain's eyes widened in disbelief. The field he thought was abandoned looked impeccable. It was even better than any training ground he had used as a mercenary. Fergus admitted he had been maintaining the place just in case the young master wanted to use it. Fergus believed Ghislain's laziness was just a passing phase of teenage rebellion, so he had kept the training ground in good condition, ready for Ghislain to use whenever he needed it. Hearing this, Ghislain was shocked, never realizing that Fergus had sincerely cared for the ground in the past without his knowledge. Ghislain stood silent for a moment, reflecting on his past foolishness when there were people around him who were loyal and sincere. He then patted the old man's shoulder, saying he needed a long life because death tasted so bitter. Fergus, puzzled, remarked that the master spoke as if he had already experienced life and death. Ghislain admitted that he had, but Fergus didn't believe him, taking it as a joke. Not wanting to waste any more time, Ghislain asked Fergus to leave as he wanted to start training immediately. After Fergus left, Ghislain thought to himself that he had always treated everyone around him as enemies, but his perspective had been too narrow. He pictured the sincere smiles Belinda, Elena, and Fergus had recently given him. Ghislain remembered that in the past, a week from now, the culprit behind Elena's death was revealed to be a nobleman from a neighboring territory. This led to a war that ended in Perdium's destruction. Ghislain understood that Elena's death was the key event that started the end of the Perdium family. This meant he had to correct everything, starting by preventing his sister's death. With a burning determination, Ghislain immediately sat down to cultivate in the middle of the field. He felt he had to master mana control, as it could be developed faster than physical strength, which required time. As he absorbed the supernatural energy around him, Ghislain was confident he could quickly strengthen his body beyond human limits, as he had been able to absorb that energy easily before, even in the chaos of a battlefield. After gathering and rotating the mana particles like a pinwheel, Ghislain easily created his mana core in a short time. But one mana core was not enough to make him one of the 7 strongest on the continent. So he used a method from a half-burnt magic book he had once acquired, allowing him to create 2 and then even 3 mana cores, forming a network connecting them. A sudden explosion of power from the mana cores caused him immense pain, making him vomit a lot of blood from his mouth and nose. Ghislain coughed and gasped, disappointed that his limit was only 3 mana cores, whereas he could previously reach 5. This method allowed for a burst of power in a short time, but in exchange, it required a large amount of mana. This was the main reason he had lost to Aiden in his previous life. Aiden had brought an entire knightly order to fight Ghislain when he was out of mana. If the fight had been fair, Ghislain was sure he would have beaten Aiden. Ghislain didn't care that the technique was unstable. The power it generated was sufficient for now. Wiping the blood from his mouth, he thought to himself that it was fine, as he now had a young body and plenty of time to train. He vowed that it was now his turn to cut off Aiden's head, as well as the heads of the bastards behind the Delphine family who helped destroy his territory. He vowed to destroy them all. A week passed, and the night of the festival arrived. The festival, which should have been joyous, now became the stage for an inevitable prelude to destruction. Elena was seen in a cold sweat, shocked that her brother actually came to accompany her to the festival. Although Elena commented that her brother's change was too drastic and mocked his previously childish attitude, she honestly liked the new him. Smiling sweetly, she remarked that the old him seemed to have returned, which made Ghislain pause for a moment. In his silence, Ghislain realized something over the past week. Because his actions and attitude had completely changed, the way people saw him and his future were also slowly beginning to change. Ghislain was sure that major events would unfold similarly, but it was difficult to know the impact of his decisions on smaller events. His current task was to use his knowledge of the future effectively and respond to every situation. For this reason, he had prepared everything he needed in a pouch hanging from his belt. Finally, Elena took Ghislain all over, enjoying the festival night to the fullest. She admitted to being a little bored because the festival events were the same every year. What made Ghislain tense and puzzled, however, was that the festival was almost over, yet nothing suspicious had happened. He wondered if it was because he was with Elena. Suddenly, Ghislain was startled by the sound of someone approaching, asking if the lady wanted to check out another area. The person, who was one of her guards, claimed a friend had told him about a new event elsewhere and suggested they go see it. Elena, completely unsuspicious, was thrilled and immediately agreed to go with him. But Ghislain stood still, staring intently at the man who had invited Elena. Ghislain said to himself that it was them, the traitors from their house. The main traitors behind Elena's death in the past were her two personal guards, Jamal and Philip. Elena's guards, Jamal and Philip, were the most trusted in the kingdom, having protected her since she was a child. In Ghislain's previous life, they were reported to have died protecting Elena with their lives, but the reality was the opposite. A moment later, all of them, including Ghislain, arrived in a deserted slum area with no one around. Elena was immediately puzzled, wondering what kind of festival this was in such a squalid place. Jamal made an excuse that the performers were getting ready and would arrive soon. But Ghislain, looking at the surroundings, was certain this place had been planned as an ambush site, evidenced by all the blocked escape routes. Annoyed that there was nothing there, Elena urged her brother to leave. But Philip immediately blocked Elena, telling her to wait a little longer with a face holding back anger. Elena was frightened, as she had never seen Philip act like that before. Feeling that he couldn't stall any longer and had already scared Elena, Jamal said with a cunning smile that he didn't mean to frighten the young lady, but a rather reasonable request had come their way. As Elena was shocked by the word request, footsteps approached from behind Jamal, revealing three mysterious figures in hooded cloaks. Their leader in the middle, named Frank, complimented them on a job well done. Jamal greeted Frank, stating that he had brought the young lady as requested and asked to finalize their negotiation. Frank, however, was slightly surprised, asking why they also brought Perdium's eldest son, as that was not part of the deal. Jamal said he was offering the eldest son for free, adding with a sly smile that he had foolishly followed them, unaware that this would be his grave. Hearing this, Ghislain told Jamal that he had betrayed them and asked if he thought he could get away with it. Jamal laughed and told Ghislain to worry about himself first, as they planned to flee far away from the poor Perdium County, which they were tired of, especially with the constant trouble from orcs and barbarians. He added that he was sure many other Perdium citizens had already fled besides them. Suddenly, with a flash of a mana-clad sword, Ghislain struck, piercing Jamal's armor and slicing his body diagonally. Jamal's eyes widened in an instant of excruciating pain, unable to react at all. A single sound, was his final utterance before he was gruesomely split in two, shocking everyone present. As the executioner, Ghislain retorted that at least the others never betrayed and sold them out. He then glared at Philip with a terrifying intimidation that frightened him immensely. Philip quickly grabbed Elena, ready to draw his sword, and cursed Jamal for being a fool, wondering how a knight could lose to an amateur. Suddenly, Ghislain's mana-clad sword flew swiftly and embedded itself in Philip's forehead, killing him instantly as he uttered his last word. impossible. The betrayal from within their own house opened a new, merciless chapter of revenge. As Ghislaine hugged Elena to protect her, Frank's two subordinates were in a cold sweat, doubting that the person before them was really Perdium's eldest son. According to reports, the eldest son had no combat experience or even basic training. Frank himself was sure that the person's appearance matched the eldest son's. But what shocked him was that even though the two guards were careless, Ghislaine had managed to dispatch them instantly. Moreover, Frank clearly saw Ghislaine use mana to kill them. Seeing Elena trembling with fear, Ghislaine was forced to strike her neck to knock her unconscious. After laying Elena on the ground, Frank thanked Ghislaine for lightening their task, noting he was very different from what he had heard. Frank admitted they had planned to get rid of the two guards later anyway, and asked if Ghislaine had been hiding his true skills all this time. Ghislaine retorted by asking what importance that held for him. He pulled his sword from Philip's corpse and faced the three of them. From the level of mana they emitted, Ghislaine knew the person in the middle was much stronger than the two beside him. Ghislaine instantly activated the mana in his body, and mysterious threads wrapped around his left hand. He knew he had to end this fight as quickly as possible and asked who had ordered them to carry out this evil mission. Frank immediately replied, asking why a dead man needed to know more. Annoyed, Ghislaine stated that he knew Frank wouldn't tell him easily, but it didn't matter, as he would be spilling it all soon enough. He glared with sharp intimidation, his sword already coursing with dense mana. Frank's subordinates also drew their swords and asked if they should just behead the eldest son. Frank refused, ordering them to capture Ghislaine alive and destroy all his limbs so that he would go mad with pain. With a cunning smile, Frank added that Ghislaine must writhe in agony to create a beautiful result. Hearing this, Frank's two men charged at Ghislaine with all their might, but Ghislaine suddenly threw a firecracker at them, startling one of them. In that moment of surprise, Ghislaine unhesitatingly thrust his sword, splitting the firecracker and viciously piercing the subordinate's head, killing him instantly. The other subordinate, angry at Ghislaine for using cheap tricks, dashed to the side and swung his sword at Ghislaine's back. But to his surprise, Ghislaine fluidly switched from a thrusting stance to a backward parry, perfectly blocking the attack. Not stopping there, Ghislaine wrapped his right arm around his opponent's sword, used his right hand to strike the man's grip, and easily disarmed him. Ghislaine then twisted his waist to the right, moving the sword away from his opponent while adding momentum to his left hand for a fatal counter-slash that beheaded the man in the blink of an eye. It all happened in a seamless motion in a fraction of a second. Suddenly, Ghislaine was startled by Frank launching a surprise sword attack from behind, but he deftly controlled the sword wrapped around his right arm with his right hand while crouching, perfectly blocking the surprise attack. Frank was shocked that his sneak attack had failed, unable to believe Ghislaine could block it from such an awkward and difficult position. It had been a perfect sneak attack. Then, without warning, Ghislaine rose from his crouch and mercilessly swung with his left hand, shocking Frank to his core. The smoking pipe fell from Frank's mouth, split by Ghislaine's slash, which had been aimed directly at his neck. But as the pipe hit the ground, Ghislaine was suddenly taken aback, as Frank's sword was still hurtling fiercely toward his head, forcing him to block it with both swords. After the clang of swords subsided, Frank, whose neck was coated in mana, remarked that he was very surprised. If he had been low on mana, his head would have been severed. Hearing this, Ghislaine, whose hands were trembling from the pressure of Frank's sword, thought to himself about how Frank survived a slash to the neck, wondering if he had focused mana around his neck to reduce the damage. Annoyed by the young boy's actions, Frank strengthened the mana in his sword grip and declared that he didn't know how Ghislaine learned such a strange sword technique at his young age, but he would die here. He unleashed an even denser, intimidating aura of mana. Mercilessly, with his superior amount of mana, Frank pressed his sword down harder, certain he would win right then and there. But Ghislaine just smiled widely under such heavy pressure, which threw Frank's confidence into a chasm of shock. Ghislaine allowed his two swords to be pressed down until they stuck into the ground. then used the rebound momentum from the embedded swords as a solid base to launch a spinning left kick that slammed into Frank's right cheek so hard it sent him flying backward. Frank caught his hat, put it back on, and said that he had told him it wouldn't work with his small amount of mana, but then he suddenly vomited a large amount of blood and fell to one knee. Racked with pain and trembling, Frank wondered what had happened, questioning how the attack power could be so different and how it was possible for Ghislain to break through his defense with his current skill level. Ghislain slowly approached the kneeling Frank and declared that he never expected the real culprit behind Elena's death to be him, telling him to prepare for his demise. Ghislain's body emanated a much denser aura, as he had activated 3 mana cores at once. This was a secret technique that Frank knew nothing about. Frank was utterly shocked, breaking into a cold sweat at the sight of Ghislain's mana increasing to such a terrifying level. Before Frank's shock could fade, Ghislain charged forward with all his might, swinging both swords simultaneously, a movement so fast that Frank was stunned. Frank struggled to block Ghislain's relentless 2-sword assault, being pushed back with every powerful blow he parried. Finally, after a last slash that sent a shriek of clashing steel into the air, Frank's hand trembled violently in pain. He thought that it was impossible that his hand had gone numb just from blocking the attacks. He mused that no matter how much mana someone had, there must be a limit, and he had never heard of a method to increase mana to this extent. Frank's sword began to crack. Seeing Ghislain's sharp gaze full of dense, intimidating aura as he prepared for his next slash, Frank finally admitted that his opponent had transformed into a different person. Without mercy, Ghislain launched a one-handed slash with his left hand, shattering Frank's defending sword into pieces and wounding him diagonally across the chest, causing blood to gush from his body. But it wasn't over. Ghislain followed up by stabbing his sword into Frank's stomach with full force. This made Frank scream hysterically in pain between bouts of vomiting blood. Ghislain then pushed Frank's neck hard with his hand, slamming him against a building wall with incredible force, causing unimaginable pain. As he pressed his sword upwards, making Frank's body tremble uncontrollably, Ghislain told him it was time to continue their earlier conversation and demanded to know who ordered him to do this. Frank, not yet ready to give up, pulled a dagger from his left sleeve, preparing to throw it at Elena to ensure his mission succeeded even if he died. Suddenly, his dagger and left arm froze, held by the mysterious threads from Ghislain's left hand. Ghislain continued, suggesting they make a deal. If Frank answered his question and didn't try anything funny, he would sheath his sword. In extreme pain, Frank was shocked to find his left hand immobile. He wondered if the threads were made of the eldest son's mana, and, if so, when Ghislain had created them. Of course, Ghislain had already prepared the mana threads on his left hand before fighting Frank's subordinates. Since Frank remained silent, Ghislain pressed his sword harder, adding that he was sure a man of Frank's caliber knew how to heal himself, but it wouldn't be a problem if he destroyed his mana core. Just as Frank was startled by this threat, Ghislain's mana-infused sword thrust shattered Frank's mana core, causing his mana to begin dispersing. Feeling pain on the brink of death, Frank screamed, asking if Ghislain was insane, warning that one mistake could cause a mana backlash explosion that would destroy the entire area, and asking if he planned to die too. Ghislain laughed, retorting that such things only apply to amateurs and that he could handle it. His confident look made Frank panic, sweat drenching his entire body. Realizing his own mana was about to explode, leading to a fatal death, Frank finally screamed the information. It was Count Desmond who made the request, saying he needed something to trigger a war between the Perdium and Degard families. The dark shadow orchestrating the war was finally revealed, paving the way for true revenge. Ghislain finally understood the motive behind the chaos. He recalled that in the past, underworld jobs like this were handed to families allied with noble houses. Ghislain was furious to learn that Duke Delphine had stooped to using the dirty hands of a lesser noble to carry out this evil plan. Ghislain then demanded to know if that was the reason Frank had to kill Elena. Just as Frank confirmed it, Ghislain plunged his sword deeper, all the way through Frank's back, causing even more blood to spurt from his body. In a state of near death, Frank panicked even more, asking what Ghislaine was doing, as this was different from what he had promised. Ghislaine replied with a cunning smile, asking what was wrong. Frank had surely killed many people before, but now he was scared when it was his turn. Suddenly, Frank began to chuckle, which slightly surprised Ghislaine. Frank pressed his head against Ghislaine's forehead and said that nothing would change even if Ghislaine killed him. He claimed to have already completed his work with Degard and questioned if anyone would listen to a boy like him, predicting that Perdium would be annihilated by war. Unable to listen to the scoundrel's rambling any longer, Ghislaine pushed Frank's face back and told him something, that he had been reborn, so this time would be different. He said this with a confident smile, followed by exploding Frank's mana core into the sky, sending him screaming hysterically into a hell of cruel retribution. The mana explosion in the sky, like a firework, was the only thing that saw him off with a gentle warmth before he burned in the hottest fires of the deepest hell. After ensuring all enemies were dead and Elena was still alive, the sword dropped from Ghislaine's grasp. He felt extremely exhausted and suddenly vomited a large amount of blood from the strain of exploding 3 mana cores at once. He was annoyed that this much effort already made him suffer so greatly, when in his past, as the Mercenary King, exploding 3 mana cores was an easy feat for him. Feeling his job wasn't done, Ghislaine rushed to break down the door of a house where he knew there was another victim. And just as he expected, inside lay the corpse of a Degard noble's child, along with the body of their night guard. With this, Ghislaine understood how the conflict had been instigated, leading to mutual accusations between Degard and Perdium that would trigger a massive war. Knowing that if this evidence became public, war would be certain in the present timeline, Ghislaine, without hesitation, used his last firecracker to burn all the evidence until nothing remained. Afterwards, he carried Elena on his back to return to Perdium, thinking to himself that he would not let things go according to their plan. However, unbeknownst to Ghislaine, his movements had been watched by another mysterious figure from a treetop. The figure immediately vanished to report to their superiors. A moment later, the figure arrived and knelt in the middle of a round table surrounded by several superiors. They berated the figure for failing to eliminate one girl, despite having sent their best knight, Frank. The cloaked figure excused the failure by blaming it all on Ghislaine Perdium. Contrary to what they knew, that Ghislaine was useless, the cloaked figure saw with their own eyes how the rumors were completely different from reality. Recalling the terrifying sight of Ghislaine's sword technique, the figure said with a fearful tone that it was like seeing a completely different person. They added that they had completed the mission related to the guard, so there would be no problem starting the territorial war, and begged for one more chance. Most of the round table members disliked the cloaked figure, who was prone to making excuses and had caused a huge loss. They wanted the figure executed immediately, but the supreme leader suddenly shouted for them to be quiet and asked what kind of chance the figure wanted. The figure panically replied that they would definitely get rid of Ghislaine Perdium by creating a duel that would occur naturally. They had someone in mind, Cain Loges, who was famous for his strength-based swordsmanship and, despite his youth, was already known as the symbol of strength for his age. The figure assured them that no one else in the north could match his power, and since Cain was Ghislaine's cousin, it wouldn't be difficult to arrange a meeting between them. This made the leadership council fall into contemplation. Finally, the supreme leader made a decision, stating that if the figure failed, there would be no more chances. And so, the cloaked figure immediately set out on their last chance. The final opportunity to erase Ghislaine Perdium now hinged on a duel that would shake the north. The scene shifts back to the Perdium Castle training ground in the morning. Fergus, having just arrived, was startled to see Ghislaine able to throw his sword into a wall and pull it back to his hand. Fergus wondered how his young master could do such a thing. Ghislaine explained that he used mana threads like a rope to control the sword from a distance. In his previous life, he used this mana thread technique frequently, but he was now disappointed that he had to explode a mana core before he could use it due to a lack of basic mana. Fortunately, he could still safely create a single mana thread even with his current limited mana. Fergus was genuinely impressed by the technique. Even though he had been training with mana for a long time, he had never seen anything like it. What impressed him even more was that Ghislain could use such a high-level mana technique when he hadn't seen him use or train with mana at all in the past few days. Ghislain then asked why Fergus was there. The old man bowed and said he came to thank Ghislain for protecting the young lady. Instead of just thanks, Ghislain invited the old man to join them for a meal. Several days had passed since then, and the festival was temporarily halted. This was understandable, as the princess's own personal guards had tried to sell her out. But what disappointed Elena, as she waited for food with Ghislain, Belinda, and Fergus, was that no one believed her when she said it was her brother, Ghislain, who had saved her. For Ghislain, convincing people didn't matter. What was important was that Elena was safe and he had prevented a war. However, he suspected that Duke Delphine's side had not given up on destroying Perdium. He thought to himself that he couldn't keep stopping them alone and that he needed to build up his military strength. A servant arrived with their food. As the meal was about to be served, Ghislain felt reluctant about getting more involved in politics to strengthen his military. A problem immediately arose right before his eyes. When the dishes were uncovered, Ghislain was surprised and asked Belinda why they were having dessert so early. Just as Belinda was about to explain their current financial situation, loud shouts about compensation came from outside, startling Ghislain. It turned out to be merchants protesting loudly at the Perdium gate. Belinda explained that their county was full of merchants who profited from the festival and that last year had gone very well. But since the festival was stopped after only one day, it was natural for the merchants to be angry, in her opinion. Hearing this, Ghislain was quite shocked. He knew the merchants would become more aggressive if he didn't do something. He asked Fergus to send soldiers to calm the merchants down. But Fergus replied that they didn't have any, as most of them had been sent to the front of the monster forest as a defense against orc attacks. This news shocked and frustrated Ghislain. Perdium County was practically a perpetual war zone due to barbarian races from the north and a monster forest from which monsters could emerge at any time. No money and no soldiers made Ghislain's head spin. He pulled Belinda aside to a corner of the room to ask about their finances. Belinda, half-jokingly, said she was out of money and that the Count had already cut Ghislain's funds because he always spent money like water. With no money and no soldiers, Perdium stood on the brink of a ruin deeper than war. A short while later, Ghislain was back in his room, sitting dejectedly by the window and staring out at the Perdium territory, wondering what they had left with no money and no soldiers. He realized that without money, there was nothing he could do, even with his knowledge of the future. He had to get money somehow. Suddenly, hurried footsteps approached his room. It was Ricardo, who reported that there was a problem. Young Master Kane wanted to see him. This made Ghislain frown. It turned out Kane had beaten Scoven badly. Scoven's armor was nearly pierced by Kane's powerful fist, and he was lying unconscious with a severely bruised face when Ghislain arrived. Seeing Kane call out to him with an arrogant tone and no hint of guilt, Ghislain remembered that arrogant face belonged to the heir of Loges County, an ally of Perdium. Kane Loges was Ghislain's only friend in the past, as well as an enemy he hated. As Kane approached Ghislain, with the cloaked villain Ghislain didn't yet recognize behind him, the Perdium heir asked Ricardo what had happened. Ricardo explained that they had initially responded to a report of a disturbance at a bar, where they found Kane with his night guards. Since they knew each other, Kane asked them if the recent rumors about young Master Ghislain were true. Commander Scoven then explained the details of the rumor to Kane. Kane, not believing the rumor that Ghislain had become strong, immediately beat Scoven to a pulp. Hearing Ricardo's story, Kane tried to defend his actions, telling Ricardo that if he was going to tell Ghislain, he should at least be honest. He claimed that the fool, Scoven, had said that Ghislain, who had never even trained, had defeated an orc with his bare hands and handled the traitorous night guards by himself. Kane said that was why he hit him a little to bring him to his senses, adding that none of this would have happened if Ghislain hadn't lied in the first place. He looked down on Ghislain, who remained silent, trying to contain his frustration. In the past, Cain had always been arrogant and treated Ghislain like a subordinate. Every time he came to Perdium, Cain caused chaos. Ghislain thought to himself that even after all that chaos, no one dared say anything because he was treated like Cain's subordinate. No one underestimated Cain. Unlike Ghislain, who always had an inferiority complex, Cain's confidence and bravery were praised as qualities befitting an heir, which was why Ghislain was criticized more. Ghislain smiled, reminiscing about his past. Seeing that Ghislain seemed to be restraining himself, Cain smiled, surprised that his provocation had failed to anger him. Just a short while ago in Loges County, the cloaked figure had come to Cain and asked him to eliminate Ghislain. The figure said that if Cain succeeded, the supreme leader would support the Loges family. Cain thought it would be easy to get rid of Ghislain, but since Ghislain was an heir, he wondered how he should go about it. The cloaked figure suggested that Cain could provoke Ghislain into a duel, making it look like an accident. It would appear as a trivial conflict between heirs, and the cloaked figure offered to accompany Cain, disguised as a night guard, to orchestrate the situation so the duel would happen. Back in the present, seeing Ghislain's unusually changed attitude firsthand, Cain wondered if the cloaked figure wanted him to eliminate Ghislain because he had changed so completely. To stick to the original plan, Cain deliberately asked Ghislain to prepare the usual things for their entertainment, since the festival was currently interrupted. After a moment of thought, Ghislain understood that Cain meant alcohol and women. In the past, he always fulfilled these requests because he didn't want to get beaten up again, but now he had no intention of doing so, as it would just waste his precious money. Then, a clever idea came to Ghislain's mind. He thought to himself that his source of money had been here all along. He stared at Cain for a long moment. Seeing Ghislain remain silent, Cain urged him to bring his request quickly. But Ghislain replied that he would, but first asked if Cain didn't have a debt to pay him. His sharp gaze made the cloaked figure behind Cain raise an eyebrow. Cain, also puzzled, asked what debt he was talking about. Ghislain smiled, held out his hand, and demanded 1,000 gold as payment for the money he had fronted for Cain's requests, including interest. Cain was annoyed, saying that preparing those things shouldn't cost more than 100 gold, and besides, Ghislain should be the one paying as a fee for their friendship, since Cain was his only friend. But Ghislain retorted, calling their friendship nonsense and saying he had always been a doormat for Cain to step on. He demanded payment before he beat him up, stating that he needed a lot of money right now. His loud declaration made Ricardo panic with fear, and the other bar patrons wondered who would dare challenge Cain, the strongest figure in the north. His pride trampled in front of so many people. Cain stood up straight and said sternly that Ghislain had gotten bold just because he let him be. He accused Ghislain of thinking he was strong just because he spread false rumors about defeating a knight. He called him a parasite who was a detriment to the land, which was why everyone in the north called him a foolish bastard, since he, an heir, did nothing but spout nonsense. As Cain told Ghislain to wake up, he clenched his left fist and suddenly threw a hard punch at Ghislain's head. But with just a slight turn of his waist to the right, and with his hands still in his pockets, Ghislain easily dodged the punch, which greatly surprised Cain, Ricardo, and the cloaked figure, their eyes widening. Annoyed that his attack failed, Cain unhesitatingly launched a powerful backhand with his left hand, but Ghislain again avoided it by ducking. Suddenly, without warning, Ghislain delivered a devastating liver blow that shocked and pained Cain so much his eye veins bulged. Not stopping there, Ghislain tried to punch Cain in the face, but Cain managed to block it with his right hand. Suddenly, Cain knelt on the floor and started vomiting from the liver blow he had just received. Seeing this, the cloaked figure rushed to check on Cain's condition, but Ghislain told him to stop whining, as he knew Cain had parried his attack. Annoyed, the cloaked figure shouted at Ghislain to back off and asked what he thought he was doing. The incident caused an uproar among the bar patrons, who couldn't believe Ghislain had just knocked Cain to his knees. Ghislaine was honestly puzzled by Kane's overreaction and how the bar patrons seemed to be exaggerating the situation. He finally understood that this was all a prepared setup. As suspected, Kane was actually whispering to the cloaked figure, asking how his acting was, and the figure praised it as great. The cloaked figure was pleased that Kane had set the stage perfectly, making people believe Ghislaine was at fault. The figure smiled, saying that this should be enough to justify a duel. Hearing this, Kane prepared to pull something from his cloak, thinking to himself that this was a rare opportunity to gain powerful support and that he had to leave a deep impression this time. It was the perfect time to cut down Perdium, a crumbling power. After pulling out a gauntlet, Kane prepared to throw it and declared that Ghislaine had dared to tarnish a nobleman's honor with lies and then attacked him for trying to verify the truth. Before Kane could finish challenging him to a duel, Ghislaine's own gauntlet had already struck him in the face, and Ghislaine declared that he was challenging Kane Loges to a duel. The move shocked and infuriated Kane. Ghislaine continued, stating that Kane had insulted him, the heir, in front of the people of Perdium, and had also attacked his knight, thus tarnishing a nobleman's honor. He asked if Kane planned to refuse the duel. This left Kane, the cloaked figure, and Ricardo speechless. Of course, Kane was not afraid of the duel challenge. He wiped the dirt from around his mouth and said with a laugh that he knew Ghislaine was a fool, but he didn't know he was foolish enough to dig his own grave. He accepted the challenge, warning Ghislaine not to regret it even if he died. As Kane pointed his sword at Ghislaine's neck, Ghislaine smiled faintly and told Ricardo to bring all the protesting merchants from the castle gates, promising to make sure they receive the maximum possible profit. Thanks to Ghislaine's clever idea, the tourists who were previously disappointed that the festival was suddenly canceled now had a replacement event that was even more exciting than the previous festival. With the crowd of spectators that showed up, the merchants who were previously angry could now sell their goods again, and some even became bookies to facilitate betting on the duel. Seeing many spectators betting on him, Kane, who was already in the duel arena, was angry to see Ghislaine dare to tarnish a sacred duel into a marketplace. Kane stated firmly that he would make it clear before they started that his sword would not stop even if Ghislaine surrendered. Ghislaine mentally agreed with Kane's words, knowing that Kane had wanted to finish him off from the very beginning. But just as Ghislaine was about to start the duel, the robed man suddenly stopped him, saying that the betting could not proceed as things stood. The problem was that no one was betting on Ghislaine because all the spectators believed that Kane would undoubtedly win. When the bookie proposed changing the betting terms to how long Ghislaine could last against Kane so that someone would bet on him, Scoven, supported by Ricardo, and Elena, accompanied by Belinda, suddenly placed their bets on Ghislaine under the original betting terms. As a result, the betting conditions for both sides were met, which greatly shocked the spectators, while the robed man moved away from the bookie with a disappointed look on his face. With that, the duel could officially begin. While drawing his sword, Ghislaine remarked that he was older than Kane, so it would be a bit strange if he started first, telling him to come forward. Ghislaine said this with a look full of confidence. Hearing this, Kane, who was already holding his sword, took a low stance and replied that it was too late for him to act like the elder, telling him to get ready. Kane instantly leaped high from his stance and launched a full power sword swing downwards with terrifying force. Fortunately, Ghislaine was still able to parry the heavy swing with his own sword, but Kane suddenly used a half-swording technique, gripping his own blade and swinging the hilt upwards to knock Ghislaine's sword defense back. Not stopping there, Kane instantly launched a diagonal downward thrust with the hilt in a relentless series of attacks. But Ghislaine agilely dodged the thrust by ducking down. Impressively, Kane then launched a hard left kick from the fulcrum of his sword hilt, which Ghislaine fortunately still managed to dodge with a sidestep. As a result, the kick shattered the duel arena floor into pieces. Seeing this, the spectators cheered because Ghislaine wouldn't block any of Kane's heavy series of attacks. The cheers made Kane smile widely, having the upper hand, and this annoyed Ghislaine quite a bit. Elena also became annoyed seeing her brother seemingly cornered, while Belinda and Ricardo panicked in a cold sweat. Belinda even started to ask if the duel should be stopped now. Of course, the one-sided exchange of mechanics made the robed man smile widely. He said to himself that it was too late to stop the duel now. No matter who the opponent was, the moment they decided to fight Cain, they were already trapped. An opponent helpless against his great power would start to think they couldn't fight him and would eventually just try to avoid him. In the end, when the opponent got tired from constantly dodging, an opening would be created and death would claim them. The robed man thought that Cain always won that way. At that moment, Ghislain continued to dodge Cain's barrage of full-power sword slashes with lightning-fast steps and body movements. Seeing this, Cain acknowledged that Ghislain was very slippery. He commented that it seemed Ghislain's skills had indeed improved and that it made sense. Cain then spun his sword and held the blade with both hands in a full blade grip. While swinging the inverted sword with all his might, Cain shouted loudly that Ghislain had always been good at running away. The sword swing shot forward with insane power, forcing Ghislain to block it with a two-handed grip on his sword. But suddenly, Cain pulled his sword, causing its guard to get caught on Ghislain's body. Then, with a full power pull and swing, Ghislain was thrown high into the air, which stunned the audience, made Ricardo panic to death, and made the robed man overjoyed. The robed man was sure that Ghislain would die now if he fell from such a height. However, who would have thought? Ghislain activated mana in his feet and said that he wanted to be gentle, but Cain had crossed the line. Ghislain then managed to land safely on the arena floor and dashed towards Cain with lightning speed, causing Cain's eyes to widen.